I want to talk about how you can handle a bad day. Many of us on a weekly basis, sometimes on a daily basis, we experience difficulties and challenges and setbacks, obstacles, but more importantly, we deal with emotional blockages that we don't really know how to handle. We don't know how to overcome. And that's what I want to talk about in the next few minutes. It's Mensah Oteh, and I hope you're well. It's always a joy and a delight to come into your homes and to share some ideas with you. I hope you find something worth listening to in the next few minutes. Now, from my personal experience, one of the things I found is we can't control external circumstances. We can't control external events. There are a few things you have to understand about life if you want to have a great experience. You have to understand that you can't control people and their attitudes and reactions. You can't control the weather, but you can control yourself. That's powerful. Now, this simply means if you're experiencing a bad day, the most important thing you have to do is, first of all, accept the reality of the situation. I believe in faith. I believe very much in faith, but I'm not naive enough to delude myself into thinking that reality is false. That simply means when things happen, don't live in denial. Embrace it, accept it, because the way you change things is by accepting and recognizing the present state of things. So the first thing that I would say would be accept things as they are. Don't deny it, because denial just leads to more pain. Denial is simply a place whereby you had a picture, you had an idea about how the day should have gone, and the reality of the day is different. And so there's a discrepancy between your ideal image of what the day should have been and how the day is. And the more you live in that picture in your mind of what you think it should be, rather than accept how it is, the more you experience pain. So my first recommendation is don't be in denial. Accept things as they are so that you can make changes. You can only change something that you've accepted. Number one, accept the day as it is. Now, the second thing I want to encourage you to do is this. Recognize that you're not a victim in life. Recognize that we are all volunteers. There are no victims in life. In every area of your life, you are the lowest common denominator. Things don't just happen to you. You may not understand the sequence of events that have led to the occurrence, but one thing I want to say to you is this. You are the lowest common denominator, so you play a part. And playing that part means that you recognize that your destiny is not simply luck and chance. It's choices and decisions. And you can make a decision not to try to wrong what's happened, not to try to right what has happened, but simply you choose how you respond and how you react to the experience. That we can control. So when things do not go well, it's less about what happened. It's more about how you react and how you respond. My second recommendation is choose, in my opinion, to respond. Do not react to life. If you react, the external events or circumstance is in control. When you respond, you're in control. Now, to be able to respond, you have to plan in advance. Now, you're not planning for the exact negative experience. What you're doing is you're planning and preparing yourself through study. You're preparing yourself through mental development and strengthening, so that when things happen, you say to yourself, I'm greater than this. I'm stronger than this. I can overcome. Who is in me is greater than anything outside. That's preparation. That's you strengthening your resolve. So make a decision to respond and to choose your response. But to choose your response, there has to be a sequence of events prior to that response or choice you make. And this comes as what I call be selective in the meaning you assign or you associate with the event. The sequence of events is that something happens, we give it meaning. The meaning we give it determines our feelings. Our feelings determines how we respond and react. That then affects our habits and ultimately creates our results. So you have to learn how to choose the right meaning. Reframe, rename the experiences in your life. So let's make it practical. Let's simply say, for example, you desperate to get a train on your way to work and the train is delayed. Now you can get upset and allow that experience to get you emotionally all worked up, or you can simply rename the experience and say, well, perhaps this was the best thing that could have happened. Maybe I've been saved, or I've been stopped from something catastrophic happening further down the line. You can also reframe it and say, maybe the driver doesn't feel too well, but maybe he has found some help, and it's better to have him healthy and safe. One of the greatest gifts we have is our mouth, our mind. Mind and speech, they give us something close to immortality. With your mind, you can create whatever you want. With your mouth, you can speak into life whatever you want. So the concept of renaming is powerful. Something happens, change the name. I'll give you a good example. When I lost a loved one a number of years ago, a very tragic experience. Talk about having a bad decade or having a bad year. It was devastating. And I couldn't find healing. I couldn't find closure in the pain that I experienced until I sat down one day and I asked myself, what's the meaning? Before then, I kept thinking of the experiences we have been robbed by life. I saw this as that he had died. I associated the experience with death. And death I associated before then with the end. But science teaches us that nothing is either created or destroyed. By changing the meaning and the name of the experience, I changed how I felt. Rather than seeing it as though I had been robbed, I saw the experience as a graduation. I renamed his dying to his graduation. I said, he's graduated from this life. Just like you and I were in kindergarten, we got to a certain age and we had to graduate. We couldn't stay in the same class. He had grown too big for the world, and so he has moved on. And for me to be expecting him to come back would be the same as someone expecting you to go back to kindergarten. You wouldn't fit in well because you've outgrown it. That change in name, that change in a choice of words began to change the way I felt. It began the healing process. But also, I changed the meaning. Now, by calling it a graduation, that meant that there was celebration with the graduation. And so that what I should have been doing should have been to be celebrating his life and the legacy he left behind. Can you see a very different change in attitude and feeling and behavior by changing the name and by reframing the meaning and the context? Automatically, my emotional stamina began to get better. I started to grow. I started to learn to find peace, even in my suffering, even in my pain. Now, I wouldn't say that it takes away all of the pain automatically, but what it does, it gives you healing. It gives you peace. You're able to come to terms with the reality of things rather than allow yourself to grieve beyond what is normally acceptable. So in your personal life, whatever that might be, a loss of a loved one, a loss of a job, maybe a relationship that's come to an end, maybe a case whereby you're just having a difficult day, maybe the gremlins in your head that come out every now and then and tell you you're not good enough, you're not smart enough, you're not beautiful enough. Whenever they come out, recognize that you have the mind and the power of your speech to rename and reframe all of your experiences. So number 3 is get good at changing the meaning. Use the concept of reframing, use the concept of renaming. Now, number 4 is something that I think we should do very often. When things happen that perhaps you don't understand, don't try to understand everything. I think that's a pain in itself. Don't try to understand everything. I say to people, your responsibility is not to understand other people. Your responsibility is to love people. So when things happen, don't try to understand, because human beings are very unique. It's so difficult to understand human behavior. If on the other hand you just decided to love instead, it's a lot easier, it's less painful. So don't try to understand the meaning of everything. Simply accept things as they are. You know, someone looks at the sky and says, why is the sky blue? I'm sure there's a reason. Someone looks at the world and says, why are some people bad and some evil? There are certain things that you shouldn't spend your time on, because your time is life. And part of the reason is not because you've accepted the status quo. Part of the reason is the intelligence in recognizing what you can control and what you can't control, and seeing things as they are. You know, real intelligence is found in your ability to hold 2 opposing ideas in your mind at the same time and still retain the ability to function. And I believe in that very much. William Shakespeare said that nothing is either good or bad, but your thinking makes it so. In other words, your bad day is based on your thinking. If, on the other hand, you decided to change your perception and your perspective, I'm certain that you might see something different from the experience. You know, one person looks at a glass cup that has half of its content and says it's half full. Another person looks and says it's half empty. It's the same cup, the same contents, just different perspectives. So you have to learn how to change your perspective and change your perception and see beyond what you might see naturally with your eyes and with your senses. Use your imagination to look beyond, use your vision to look beyond things as they might come across, and find the good. In everything that happens, there is always a good. Now, I know this sounds very controversial and perhaps incorrect, but you cannot have light without understanding darkness. You can't have good without evil. You can't have right without wrong. It's called the law of polarity, the law of opposites. In every good situation, there exists something that you can learn from. You might call it a bad. In every bad, there is a good. You may not see it. We may not see it. It doesn't negate the fact that it exists. The timing of its arrival and its manifestation may also vary. But even when you're having a bad day, wear the mindset of a child. Be curious and ask yourself this profound question. What am I not seeing? I think that's so powerful. What am I not seeing? There's always something you cannot see because you're so focused on what's going wrong that you'll fail to see the woods from the trees. You have to ask yourself the question, what am I not seeing? I think sometimes disappointments come as blessings, packaged in a unique way. What you might consider to be a disappointment or an obstacle could be a real blessing, protecting you from something that could have been more tragic. So ask yourself the question, what am I not seeing? And find one good in everything, like a child would. Be curious. Have a fascination towards life. See life as, and the circumstances in life as, an orchestrated series of events to enable you achieve your final purpose in life. And if that's the case, then it means you wouldn't be upset or emotionally aroused to the point of being negative when things happen. I hope that's been useful. Now let me share one last item with you. When things go the way you do not want them to go, apply what I call the law of revision. In your mind's eye, see yourself experiencing the perfect experience. So let's say, for example, you're driving and you're late for a meeting and your car breaks down. Now you're delayed by 1 hour. You're frustrated. Go back into your mind and see yourself driving, but this time around, you didn't have a breakdown. You arrived safely. You had the meeting. You might be thinking, what's the whole point of this? After all, it's not true. Everything that happens in reality has its original source as an idea in someone's mind. So the art of revision is you correcting the past, because your past doesn't disappear, your past still exists. So when things happen, whatever thoughts you have that you associate with that experience, those thoughts are creative, and they are created, and they begin because your imagination is power. And that creation process moves into your future. So for most of us, a lot of the experiences we have, we don't realize that we created them by our thoughts, negative and positive. So the reason you revise the experience is so that when your mind, which sometimes operates like an unruly animal, doesn't know when to stop and start, when your mind runs back to that negative, because our minds are drawn usually to negative experiences, when your mind goes racing back to that negative experience, rather than creating based on a negative seed, because you've revised the experience, you now have a positive memory, so that your future becomes positive. It's no mystery that some people live a really fascinating life, a really beautiful life filled with no pain and no injuries, and that's because they are very conscious of how they create. So in a tragic experience, when you encounter an obstacle, think about the future. Don't think about immediate gratification and in the present. Someone runs into your car, rather than have abusive words and have all this thought about what you could have done and how you're going to sue them, come from a place of peace and happiness and love and joy, because you're creating the future. That is how you handle a bad day. Now, there's so much more I can give you, but I'm going to stop now. Take those 4-5 different principles and see how you can apply it into your personal life. And I want to wish you the best of luck. But remember this, happiness is a choice. So it's not whether things are going well or going wrong. Just choose to be in a happy state. Choose to live a happy life. And you'll find that your experience of life becomes very remarkable and one that you're happy to share with other people. Happiness is a choice. Let's both decide to be happy.